ready to go?
Yes, we're good to go.
All right, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Youth Fight Back, Solidarity Against State Terror in the US and abroad. My name is Nadia, and I serve on the National Executive Board of the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm part of the International League of People's Struggle. I'm here today out of Oakland, California, which is a Ohlone territory of University of the Shan. And very happy to be here. We are honored to be convening today on International Youth Day with our allies all across the world and across the so-called United States from different struggles, but all pointed to the same enemy, which is of course imperialism. Today we have panelists from Anakbayan-USA, the Palestinian Youth Movement, Students for a Democratic Society, Boricua Resistance, National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the majority of which are members of the International League of People's Struggle, the US chapter. Some of the objectives of today are to strengthen organizational relationships with each other and to highlight the role of youth in struggle against neoliberalism, fascism, and imperialism, to better educate one another on our national relationships and to our work and active campaigns so that we can support each other. And finally, to always emphasize the importance of anti-imperialist international solidarity. Just to give y'all a little bit of an orientation to some of our housekeeping. So today we will be giving the floor to a speaker from each organization, and I will introduce them. And then after that, we will have, inshallah, a lively Q&A. So if you have any questions, please direct message them in the chat to our comrade, and we will compile them and present the questions to our panelists during the Q&A. Let's see. During the program, we really invite each of you to make a protest sign, paper or digital, related to our topic today. And at the close of our program, we will take a mass screenshot of all attendees who would like to participate and post them on Facebook in a digital rally. So think about, what demands do you have of the state? What demands do you have that you want to highlight in this moment? Lastly, so again, just for questions, Chrisley and Skylar are collecting questions. So please direct your messages to them so that we can compile them to ask at the end. Next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, what do we mean by state terror? So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we're demanding no repression against activists, no militarization against the people, no US wars, occupation, or state violence, no fascism, neoliberalism, or imperialism. Today's political climate is bubbling with hundreds and hundreds of years of exploitation. And this current political climate, as we know, has been punctuated by multiple events. Before we transition into inviting our first speaker, I just want to highlight that the COVID pandemic is affecting our people throughout the so-called United States and all around the world. In many cases, paired by deadly state response. In April, there was a wave of essential worker strikes, including Amazon, Instacart, and Whole Foods workers who did walk-offs demanding safer conditions, PPE, and hazard pay. April 15th, nurses staged a national day of action here in the so-called United States demanding PPE. And in June, we know that Trump removed protections for transgender health. March 13th marks the police murder of Breonna Taylor, and May 25th was the brutal lynching of George Floyd that sparked uprisings all over the United States. and solidarity actions globally. Nationwide protests against police killings and the police state grew rapidly in June, and many of us were a part of them. And then in July 1st, of course, Israel attempted to pass the annexation bill of the West Bank, and Palestinians all around the world and in Palestine kicked off the days of rage and resistance. And last but certainly not least, July 3rd, the Philippines anti-terror bill was signed into law, further criminalizing protests. I know within that there are many, many more events that have happened that are contributing to the current political moment, but we are in a very particular time, and some of these events are the backdrop that our panel today is taking place within. And so we know that our work every day is imperative to moving forward, confronting this reality and constructing a different present together. So thank you so much for being here, and shout out to y'all, the organizers of this event. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers who will particularize their people's struggle to the topic today. First up, please meet Delilah Pierre of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Delilah is a Black activist and writer living in Tallahassee, Florida, and she has organized for community control of the police, divestment and defunding of the police after the deaths of Michael Johnson and Tony McDade, and passing of the most inclusive conversion therapy ban in the nation. She is also a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Thank you, Delilah. You have the floor.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that incredible introduction. I'm really happy to be here and to be speaking on behalf of this panel, because all of these are things I fight for every day and find to be very important. The National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, to kind of update y'all, was originally founded actually in 1973 in Chicago, Illinois. It grew out of the struggle to free Angela Davis from these kind of false charges on her murder surrounding the aborted attempt to free Jonathan Jackson, George Jackson, and the Soledad brothers. And since then, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression has been building a movement against brutality, against police oppression, against these systems that prevent activists and prevent organizers from making consistent change in the world, because we know that, as much as people fight for something better to happen, there's all of these systemic obstacles preventing activists, specifically if they be Black, specifically if they be radical, from making consistent changes that actually affect and change how the world operates and works. And so something huge that groups like the National Alliance Against Political and Racist Repression and groups all around the country have been fighting for is community control of the police. Community control of the police is especially really big on the platform of Chicago's Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which Frank Chapman essentially leads. And basically, the fight for community control of the police stems from this understanding of how the police repress us and how the state uses the police as a tool to prevent us from having control over our own communities, from having control over our own spaces. Because people talk a lot about defunding the police, but I think we kind of need to take it a step further than that and say, yes, we absolutely need to defund the police. I know in places like Tallahassee and Jacksonville, the police take up to 1/3 or 1/4 of the budget there, but it's more than that. It's specifically giving the mechanisms of control that the people need to change how the police operate, to change how they act. And that takes, I think, a lot of work and a lot of steps to do. And so I know in Chicago, Frank Chapman has been getting alderpersons, which are kind of like the political candidates in Chicago, to speak up on behalf of community control of the police, and has been basically reviving an already pretty large movement there. I don't know if y'all have seen, but there was recently a looting, kind of like a rebellious action in Chicago, as well as a rise in the amount of people protesting from, a slowly dimming consciousness, kind of like as we've seen in other places, people, I guess, losing their faith or not exactly stepping up to stand up for the movement, to thousands of people taking to the streets to advocate for community control of the police and to fight and struggle for a better world. So that's really amazing and awesome. And places like where I live, Tallahassee or Jacksonville, we've also been seeing a struggle for community control of the police, as well as a struggle against the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, which is essentially a Bill of Rights that exists in Florida that makes it difficult to impossible to establish community control of the police in its fullest form, because it gives police officers these protections that prevent them from having to face real consequences for their actions, and makes it difficult to impossible to have real internal investigations. And so in Tallahassee, since the May 30th protests, since everything that's been going on, we've had actually the deaths of 2 Black men in our community, the deaths of Michael Johnson and Tony McDade. Tony McDade was a Black trans man and Michael Johnson was a Black cis man. And they were both murdered by TPD within a period of 2 months. And seeing the massive uprising there, seeing people starting to really fight for community control of the police, the ability to hire and fire police officers, the ability to really have control over police's policies, their quote unquote unions that they work with, the ability to fire people like the Tallahassee police chief, Lawrence Revel, who's responsible for the death of a 19-year-old Black boy, George Lil Nuke Williams. It was really awesome and amazing to see and seeing, I think, Florida stand up and fight for community control of the police as well. And we've seen in places like Utah and other places around the nation how people have been willing to stand up and fight for community control of the police, such as the Twin Cities and Dallas. We've also kind of seen the National Alliance Against Political and Racist Repression, of course, fight against political repression and racism, fighting on behalf of Gerald Reed, who was essentially tried for a case in which he was tortured for information and evidence. And we know that the Chicago Police Department is responsible for, torture on a systemic level, on abusing civilians, on trying to get evidence from civilians in illegal and unjust ways. We've had national days of action where thousands of people have come out to stand against political prisoners such as Gerald Reed, to stand for Black and brown people who have been incarcerated or murdered by the state, to stand for people who are still in prison till this day, with everything that's happening. So I think when we kind of talk about the National Alliance Against Political and Racist Repression, we just have to think about how we are changing the dynamics of how people see activists, organizers, people fighting against imperialism, how we are standing up to create a movement that can truly keep us safe against these forces that murder and arraign us. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Delilah. Yeah, it's extremely clear, and thank you for sharing the powerful work that you and NAARPR does and is doing across the country. I think you also opened up your section by talking about the internationalist politic that you have and that this organizing must connect to. And so with that, I'd like to bring in some of the transnational context. I'd like to bring you in, Alex Salah of the Palestinian Youth Movement. Alex is a PYM organizer based out of Houston, Texas, and serves as the chair of the Student Empowerment Committee. Alex is committed to engaging students and community members with transnational movement building and amplifying Palestinian demands for liberation and self-determination. It's always a pleasure to organize with you, Alex. The mic is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Again, my name is Alex Salah, and I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. And just really fast, I wanted to say the Palestinian Youth Movement is a transnational, independent, grassroots movement of young Palestinians in Palestine and in exile worldwide as a result of the ongoing Zionist colonization and occupation of our homeland. And so for this, I wanted to talk about the role of the youth in the movement, both historically and today, and contextualizing that with sort of where we sit as the Palestinian youth movement and our positionality in that. So as we know, historically, the youth have been the lifeblood of the revolution, of pushing left politics and pushing forward our national liberation struggle. And we see this as early as 1959. Almost 10 years after 1948, which was the Zionist colonization of our homeland in Palestine, the General Union for Palestinian Students emerged in Cairo. And this was the first major Palestinian institution, even preceding the Palestinian Liberation Organization by 6 years. And within the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they were the group that pushed left politics. So in the greater framework for, pushing national liberation, it was the youth and the student wing of the movement that was pushing the PLO as a whole to adopt a class analysis when we talk about the Palestinian liberation struggle. It was the student movement that also made sure that they had strong connections with the communities in which they were working in. So as we know, the Zionist occupation forces would routinely shut down education from primary school to higher education, such as universities, one of which was Birzeit University, which is where a lot of the students would do their activism and their organizing. And when the universities would shut down, the student movement went back to the villages and to the refugee camps and took the political knowledge and education that they learned on their campuses and used it to mobilize their communities. So from the beginning till now, the youth have pushed forward this connection to class struggle and in the national liberation struggle, and to unity with the communities and building out a comprehensive struggle. Now, bringing this into today, after we've seen the demise of GUPS, Students for Justice in Palestine chapters have emerged across the country and have really taken over the campus to set the narrative for what Palestine means in today's context. So over 60 universities have passed divestment resolutions on their campuses. And by divestment resolutions, I mean that they have passed through their student government a resolution that says the university will not do work or will not support companies or buy from companies or contract with companies that profit off of the occupation of Palestine. And I think it's really important to talk about this student work in the context of transnational organizing, number one, and in an international framework. Because in order to pass a divestment resolution, students need to build power vertically. So they need to mobilize a group of students from across different student organizations to say, this is something we unify around because we recognize it is a collective evil that affects us individually and as a whole. So in order to do this, it's really impressive, and it highlights two things. One, it highlights the need to build joint struggle in our liberation work. And number two, it shows how innate an internationalist framework is to you. The connections between our struggles are more than just arbitrary. They're very tangibly shown through the systems of oppression that exist within our community. However, this is like a mouthful, y'all. 5 minutes is 5 minutes. But as we are, I myself am a student, and as I'm getting closer to graduation and moving off, I am grounded in the necessity to move campus work into the community. Where one exists as an activist space, as Palestinian and Arab youth, we have a commitment to the national liberation struggle to work within our communities and build power there, which is where the role of the Palestinian youth movement comes in. We are grassroots and community-based organizing on the grounds, particularly addressing the context and needs of the different Palestinian and Arab communities we live in, while maintaining PYM's return and liberation framework on struggle. So to conclude, I want to uplift a couple of our action items. So we are asking people to join the letter campaign to free Imam Jamil, a civil rights icon and a human rights activist wrongfully imprisoned. We are asking people to join with us as we reject the reconstruction of Yarmouk and the demolition of the redistricting of the camp. And lastly, for Palestinian and Arab youth, we ask that you join our organizing and join the movement for the liberation and self-determination of the Palestinian people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex. And yeah, this is so excellent already to hear from you, Delilah, and hear from you, Alex. Up next is I welcome Mahmoud Nuhu, who is an organizer for the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, or the AAPRP. He started organizing in California in 2007. Prior to organizing with the AAPRP, Mahmoud was a student organizer on the campus of San Jose State University. During his student activist days, he founded Hood Patrol to document police misconduct and to inspire the community to stand up against the criminal justice system, or the criminal justice system, right? He is also integral to the work of House of Sankofa, Liberation Gardens, and the National Network on Cuba. Brother Mahmoud works in solidarity with various oppressed people of the world to obliterate capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, and white supremacy. The floor is yours.
Revolutionary salute, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity, appreciate the chance to have the floor. Once again, I'm Minister Mamat Rawi Nahu with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I'm an organizer here in the California area. I'm also a minister of the House of Sankofa, as the sister already said. I want to talk about a few things. I know we got a short amount of time, yet this concept of reform and revolution. Right here, right now, what we see has been going on for a long, long time. So we want to make sure that we start putting together some concrete plans, working together to develop concrete plans that we can utilize to, keep the terrorists off our back, and not only our back, also the backs of our children as they come up. African proverb is the job of the child is to correct his or her parents' mistakes. So as we stand on our ancestors' shoulders with respect, we do understand that there were some mistakes that were made, and it's our job to correct those mistakes. Reform and revolution are two separate things, and I'm going to give a quick analogy to a bathroom. Those who are on this call, over 150 people on this call or on this webinar, if you can relate, you can relate. If not, do your best to try to follow with us. We have bathrooms. You go in the bathroom, it smells kind of bad. You look around, there's nothing wrong with the toilet, there's nothing wrong with the sink, nothing wrong with the tub. It's actually mold. So you call the owner of the property, you tell him or her that there's mold. They come in, they do an assessment. Most folks want the quick fix. The quick fix is to clean it and paint over it. The problem with painting over the mold is that mold continues to grow aggressively, even more aggressively underneath the paint, because no one's doing anything to clean it. By the time you see it again, it's so powerful that you already have the mold in your lungs and you may be developing respiratory issues. The counter to that is to go in there, see that the bathroom is moldy, destroy the bathroom. As much time it may take, as much energy it may take, destroy the bathroom, break down the walls, get rid of the dry wood, get rid of the wood, get rid of the paint, and build a new bathroom with fresh wood, fresh paint, etc., etc. What we have to do is look at our situation here in the United States of America as a moldy bathroom. Do we want to go in and paint over the mold? Or do we want to go ahead and bring it down and rebuild something? Here at the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we're about revolution, hence the Revolutionary Party. So we're looking to figure out how do we bring it down. Delilah brought up this concept of defunding the police, and I think Delilah has some great points. We're in the same boat. Instead of defunding the police, we say reroute the funds. Reroute the funds to the community. Allow the community to determine who we're going to elect as our community protectors. This sister, this brother, this therapist, people who can relate to our community, people who have the skills, the tools that's needed to communicate with our community. A lot of things that take place in our community is due to miscommunication, cultural incompetency, and other issues like that. So we need to be able to hire those folks who have the skills, who can relate to us. We need to be able to pick those folks. I don't want to defund the police department without replacing it. Once we pull something out, once we destroy something, we have to replace it, because you better bet your bottom dollar that if we are in a position to defund the police, those same people who've been cracking the whip, shooting us, beating us, forcing us into slavery by way of the prison system, engaging in sex trafficking, drug distribution, and everything else, those same folks, the police department, FBI, CIA, and everybody else, they're going to have issues, and they're going to come. There'll be consequences and repercussions for the decisions that we make. So what I'm saying is, yes, I'm not scared of them, clearly. What we need to do, though, is put together a united front that's going to be able to protect our folks after we make decisions like this. So what I'm saying is we push for the rerouting of the funds. The funds come to us, we increase our employment in the community, we increase our training in the community, and like I said, those people who are walking the streets protecting us, they have invested interest in the well-being of our community. They have invested interest because their child goes to school with my child. Their grandmother goes to bingo with my grandmother, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to be very clear. The other piece is this concept of organizing and mobilizing. You can have organizing with mobilizing, and it can be very, very successful. Mobilizing without organizing can be dangerous, as we've seen. In the 92 riots, so they call them, which we call the uprisings and rebellions in LA, the folks was very clear that we were not in agreement with what was going on. And we expressed that by way of going and taking out to the street. That energy didn't last forever though, because it was mobilization. It was on the spot type of mobilizing. Organizing though, with organizing, we'll be able to sustain a movement. So I'm not against mobilizing. I'm saying mobilizing has to come after the organizing takes place. When you go to events and folks are out there mobilizing, rallying up, many times as we've seen, there's police officers and other people that we're not for that's a part of these groups because we haven't took the time to vet who these people are, identify who these people are. So I'm really serious about the importance of organizing the same way we're doing right now. As we do these type of webinars and we sit up and we start communicating with one another, exchanging resources with one another, then we know who's a part of these marches. We have a plan to ensure that this march or these protests are not being pulled and pushed by other folks who have reformist interests or straight capitalist interests in using our energy against us. With that, I appreciate your time. Much respect. Revolutionary salute to all y'all on the call.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. And I know 5 minutes is tough with so much to say, and I think for all of us sitting here learning from y'all, it's also so much to kind of hear and learn together. So please do write in your questions and answers, questions and comments for the question and answer session at the end of this, so that we can engage in more discussion together. So next up, please welcome Nikki Pagulayan, who is the education officer of Anakbayan-USA, which is an overseas chapter of Anakbayan Philippines, the largest Filipino youth and student organization fighting for national democracy towards socialism in the Philippines. Nikki joined Anakbayan New York in 2015 and is a founding member of Anakbayan Queens, New York. Nikki, you have the floor.
Give me 1 second. Okay. Warm and revolutionary greetings, everyone. Again, my name is Nikki. Greetings from the East Coast in New York and Lenape territory. I'm with Anakbayan-USA, and we are so honored to be here tonight amongst youth and student community activists and revolutionaries representing militant people struggles here in the US and across the world. AB-USA is a grassroots anti-imperialist, anti-fascist, anti-feudal Filipino youth and student organization fighting for national democracy with a socialist perspective in the Philippines that serves as the largest overseas chapter of Anakbayan Philippines. The struggle for national democracy and socialism is a direct response to the Philippine society being semi-colonial, dominated by foreign interests, namely the United States, and semi-feudal, meaning that the large majority of Filipinos are exploited peasant farmers who are producing for a global market. The existence of a large Filipino diaspora in the US and elsewhere is a direct consequence of these systemic problems in the Philippines. I'll be sharing a bit today on the current situation for Filipinos at home and abroad, and the role of Filipino youth overseas in fighting for genuine liberation and democracy and a socialist alternative back home in the Philippines. As we know, COVID-19 has exposed the worsening crisis of the global imperialist system. In the Philippines, those begging for food and relief are met with bullets. Testing can only be afforded by the ruling elite, and the country continues to export healthcare workers across the globe while the country doesn't have enough to staff its own facilities. And instead of prioritizing policies that address the people's needs, the Duterte government has prioritized making $2 billion arms sales with the US. That comes from our tax dollars that inevitably will be used towards human rights abuses against our people. In the face of mass protests against the Duterte regime's failed COVID response, the government has deliberately chosen to sign the anti-terror law, which gives it the power to define what terrorism is and criminalize anyone it deems a terrorist. Even before the ATL came into effect, There have been so many activists, critics, ordinary people who've been jailed, arrested, and murdered for asserting their democratic rights. In these past few weeks alone, we've seen mass arrests of activists and ordinary people demonstrating their basic right to protest. And just 2 days ago, Randy Echanes, a national mass leader of the Kilusang Mabukid ng Pilipinas, or the Peasant Movement of the Philippines, an organization representing the toiling peasant masses, was brutally killed by the PNP in his home in Quezon City. And what's key for us as Anakbayan-USA is to recognize that the ATL has extraterritorial power, meaning that all Filipinos, regardless of residence, and even non-Filipinos who violate the terror law, can be deemed as terrorists by the Philippine government. Overseas Filipino workers can be deported or have their assets frozen for complaining about getting slow support from the Philippine government. Non-Filipino citizens can be blacklisted from entering the country simply for sharing a petition to veto the anti-terror law. The ATL will only worsen the attacks overseas Filipinos have already been facing through Duterte's counterinsurgency efforts, namely the whole-of-nation approach, which militarizes government institutions to repress the revolutionary movement and anyone who opposes Duterte. Philippine National Police outposts have been set up in California and the East Coast to survey activists and any critics of Duterte. In 2019, a speaking tour conducted by the disingenuous Mindanao Indigenous Peoples Council of Elders, or MIPSL, was used to vilify and red tag progressive organizations, including Anakbayan-USA, that support the indigenous Lumad fight for self-determination. So what is AB's role in fighting the ongoing state terror and economic crisis? For one, we see it as a role to wage campaigns of the working masses. As a mass organization, as an organization representative of the masses, we need to root ourselves among the working class and engage in working struggles. Student workers who've been laid off because of the pandemic, campus workers not given enough equipment or proper pay, healthcare workers who face similar and even worse issues, and many of whom are Filipino, food service workers, and migrant workers such as J1 visa workers, as well as seafarers that are predominantly Filipino as well. And have faced very little accountability from both the US and Philippine government. Secondly, but still very important, is our waging of the Oust Duterte campaign. Understanding that ousting Duterte from office is one step to advancing the national democratic movement, and that we as Filipinos overseas play a key role in building the mass movement against Duterte's fascism, linking the struggles of Filipino migrant workers here to the fight against fascism in the Philippines. And lastly, but still very much important, is building broad anti-imperialist solidarity with other youth and people's organizations. As anti-imperialists, as internationalists, as Filipinos living in the belly of the beast, we understand that imperialism and fascism is not only impacting the Philippines, but oppressed peoples and nations across the world. So it's integral that we oppose US imperialism at all turns and build with other organizations and movements struggling against US imperialism for freedom and self-determination. We can strike a deadly blow to US imperialism through our solidarity forged and shared struggle. So what is the role of youth overall? What can we take away from this on International Youth Day? And for one thing, it's that both in the Philippines and in the US, it is clear that there is no future for Filipino youth and all youth under imperialism. We must not only fight against the fascist Duterte government, but advance the cause of national democracy towards socialism in the Philippines as part of the global fight against imperialism. If there's anything that fascists like Duterte have done us the good favor of doing, it's in exposing that the system is obsolete. So more youth are rising up to take action, seeing themselves as integral to the legal mass movement for national democracy in the Philippines, joining and forming national democratic organizations, even overseas. And the severity of repression under the Duterte regime has propelled more youth to not only join the legal mass movement, but to take up the highest form of struggle, to join the armed struggle in the countryside where the New People's Army continues to fight for genuine peace based in justice for over 50 years. We live in a system that gives us nothing, where our sacrifices are meant to only serve the ruling elite. And so the Filipino youth who take up arms, who abandon their studies or career aspirations to join picket lines, to build organizations to grow the mass movement in the cities and across the world, we recognize that there is something better worth sacrificing for, even if it is a revolutionary future that we may not live to see. Because our role as youth is to choose and build a future, together with the masses of toiling workers and peasants, to build a system that belongs to the people rather than to succumb to a system ready to kill us. Nothing belongs to us under capitalism: land, housing, education, and so on, but the mass movement for national democracy does. Our task doesn't simply stop at ousting dictators. The masses must build their political power in order to solve the problems of sovereignty and land towards building the socialist alternative our people have dreamt of and shed blood for, a system truly built and led by the people. Only through militant struggle can the best in youth emerge. And that's proven true in the growing youth and student movements that continue to immerse themselves among the struggles of the most oppressed and exploited. And as so many struggles for liberation and self-determination rise across the world, we must remember that genuine solidarity is forged through shared struggle, and that we can unite against our common enemy, but we can also unite on our shared aspiration for liberation and a world free from the chains of US imperialism. If you can go to the next slide, please, really quick. So these are some calls to action. Please feel free to read through, because I'm totally sure I'm running over time. But I think one thing that we want to be clear is, because it is so urgent, is that we are calling for all of you here today, all of our organizations, to mobilize alongside us with Anakbayan-USA tomorrow, demonstrating our outrage against the killing of Karendi Ikanis and the ATL, and to stand with the peasant struggle in the Philippines for land and justice. Makibaka para sa pambansang demokrasya, long live the national democratic struggle, long live international solidarity. Let's smash the old world and build the new. Thank you.
Whew. Thank God this is live streamed, y'all, so we can go back to those last pieces of Nikki going off. Thank you so much. Mabuhay to the youth of the Philippines. And yes, to smashing the old world and rebuilding the new. I want to transition to you, Karen, and the West Coast who is the West Coast organizer for CISPES and part of the Salvadorian diaspora in LA. She began organizing with CISPES in 2018 in Los Angeles, where she participated in the anti-war privatization campaign. Karen is committed to working with others to build a future that cares for people and our planet, essentially an anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-patriarchal future in El Salvador and beyond. And again, CISPES, as you can see on the slide in front of you, is the committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador. So with that, Karen, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much to all the speakers who are here. It's really great to be here with you all, to be sharing space virtually. Just to give a little context as to like our org, CISPES is a solidarity organization that has been accompanying the Salvadoran social movement since the beginning of the Salvadoran Civil War in 1980. All of our work is directly informed by our allies in El Salvador, various like grassroots organizations that we work with. And so we have 6 chapters across the country. Like my bio says, I live here in LA. Even though we are not strictly a youth organization, in fact, our membership is very intergenerational. However, in recent years, our membership and leadership has shifted to young Central Americans, which I think is very exciting, and I hope continues. And so I think in order to delve into our campaign, it's also important to give a little bit of context as to why we're having this campaign. So our campaign is called Responding to Authoritarianism. And so the authoritarianism that it refers to is that of Nayib Bukele, who is the current president of El Salvador, who was elected last year, and he won overwhelmingly. Unfortunately, Nayib represents a return to right-wing, pro-profit, patriarchal dominance in El Salvador that has caused a lot of concern amongst our allies in El Salvador and also amongst us here in the diaspora. Throughout his first year in office, Bukele has continued the legacy of past right-wing administrations. And just to give a few examples, he has solicited various international loans from the International Monetary fund, the Inter-American Development Bank. And these loans are like just will further indebt the country, and also a lot of the conditions that some of these loans come with include like cutting public services or cuts to public programs. He, in addition, has also been very friendly with the Trump administration. You know, one need only look at his immigration policies and also his attitudes towards immigration to see like how willing he is to give into, you know, Trump's like kind of bullying approach towards Central America. And also he has made it very clear that the country is open for foreign investment, you know. And so he is basically a return of like this kind of like neoliberal wave that had been kind of existing in the country since the end of the Civil War. And so during the pandemic, things have only worsened. Nayib has only like kind of gone further into this authoritarianism. At the beginning of the outbreak, he issued an executive order that permitted that allowed the police and military to enforce a nationwide quarantine, and this led to the like detainment of over 4,000 people in containment centers, where, you know, people were more at risk of being of contagion from the virus. His approach has also very much neglected like very vulnerable populations, such as like folks in the LGBTQ community, women, children. And he has not said anything about just like the increase in feminicide in the country, increase in like domestic violence. And so, you know, all these like arbitrary detentions as well of folks is like a clear violation of people's constitutional rights. And so this kind of paints the scenario as to like why we have this responding to authoritarianism campaign, which basically, if we can go to the next slide, we are working right now with other organizations to urge Congress members to have them cut security funding for El Salvador that is going towards funding the military and also funding like education and military education and training programs. And so we are currently in the process of trying to get Congress members to cut those funds. And so actually, like, if you would like to support, we have a call to action, which I believe is the first link. You can go and it'll send an email to your Congress member urging them to cut these security funds. So I really encourage you all to do that. And so just to note as well, like, you know, because today is International Youth Day, I think part of the reason why Nayib has been so successful is because leading up to his campaign, he was able to utilize social media and in that way mobilize a lot of youth in supporting his campaign and supporting him. And through social media, he has continued to disparage the other branches of government, paint himself as a victim, etc. And so just to say, you know, that I think like that kind of makes it even all the more important for us as youth in the diaspora and also for youth in El Salvador, you know, to continue to organize and like to share that, like, the real analysis of what's going on in El Salvador and counter all of his lies. And also to say as well that there's a lot of cool youth groups in El Salvador that are organizing and doing the work as well of like countering his administration. And so, yeah, just that's, I believe my time is up, but thank you so much for inviting me again. And I encourage you all to reach out if you would like to get involved with CISPES. We have our IG handles there and my email address. So yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yes, end patriarchal dominance everywhere. And let's definitely stop our tax dollars from going to security and military aid to El Salvador. Thank you so much. Next up is Tommy Nunez. He hails from Brooklyn, New York, and is an undergraduate at Binghamton University. He has been organizing for 1 year with the New York chapter of Boricua Resistance and with various student organizations in Binghamton University. Boricua Resistance is an alliance of organizations whose mission is to educate, organize, and mobilize the Puerto Rican diaspora in the United States for a free and anti-capitalist Puerto Rico. So Tommy, the floor is yours.
Hey y'all. Well, I just gotta pin balance real quick for the time. Let's see. My bad, give me a second. All right, so you go to the next slide though. So today we'll be talking about Puerto Rican youth who fight back in the diaspora and on the island. I'm Tommy, by the way. So in this picture we have over here Don Pedro Albizu Campos, who was a leading figure in the Nationalist Party. And one thing that he said back in probably 1940, 1950 was young people have the duty to defend their country with weapons of knowledge. And the youth, as the lifeline of the movement, definitely need to study and like use past experiences to educate themselves on how to continue it. And in the corner picture, we can see the cadets of the Republic, who were a youth wing of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, and they participated in uprisings during the 1950s. Next slide. So within diaspora, which is, you know, people on the mainland United States, because Puerto Rico is a incorporated territory, or unincorporated territory, sorry, but basically a colony. Within the United States, we have had the Young Lords Party, which is very commonly associated with the Black Panther Party from back in the 70s, and also El Comité, MINB, which I think we might organize with NYC, but I'm not sure if it's the same organization. I know we organize with El Comité. And at Binghamton, one young lord slash ex young lord, ex Black Panther, Denise Oliver Velez, came to my school, and during the fall semester, and she gave a speech, which was basically a Q&A, talking about like organizing in New York City and going to Puerto Rico to organize with Native Islanders. All right, next slide. So students in UPR, which I've gotten the opportunity to meet some through organizing, even though I've been involved for about a year now. But there's been a lot of resistance from students in the University of Puerto Rico, and it's been a center of resistance within the faculty and the students. And one of the most notable strikes were those of 2010. And in that time, 10 out of 11 campuses were shut down, and faculty and students were, you know, what's it called? Like, my bad. They were just like, you know, gathering, closing off buildings, spaces that, you know, were normally open for everybody to, you know, protest, which is a common form. Then, so we go to the next slide. In 2017, there were 20 students who interrupted a meeting about the budget cuts, and 7 of those students were arrested, which definitely sucks, and are awaiting trial. And they're fighting the legality of the cases, and hopefully, you know, I feel like this is something that should be illegal, you know, to fight against budget cuts. So hopefully that their cases work out. Next slide, please. So in many places, not just Puerto Rico, but around the world, May Day is a common day of resistance, and it's continually used to fight just the repression from US imperialism and corrupt government within Puerto Rico. So post Hurricane Maria, 60,000 people mobilized, which was a large gathering, and Nina Dross was arrested, but she was released last year. And during 2018, there was police response to the May Day protest again. And very similar to what we see in America now, there was tear gas, pepper spray, and, you know, unlawful entering by police. Next slide, please. So during this Ricky Renuncia situation was when I started getting involved, which was last year. And so basically what happened was there was just a lot of stuff going on within society. It was rampant machismo. There have been currently in 2020, there's been 4 trans women killed this year alone, with widespread domestic violence. And youth, in particular queer youth, have been on the forefront of challenging gender violence. Ricky Rosselló, who was the former governor, was caught with like sexist texts and sexist, homophobic, transphobic, all terrible things in the Telegram chat, and that got exposed from someone within the chat, and people basically uprose and got rid of the governor. And that was the beginning of my organizing days. Next slide. So overall, Hurricane Maria was a big event in 2017 with almost 5,000 people dying in the hurricane. But the struggles have been ongoing for the youth and like all society. Youth unemployment is close to 20%. And a lot of these jobs are minimum wage, but the cost of living happens to be higher in Puerto Rico due to the Jones Act. So a $7.25 minimum wage is not really something that is, you know, sustainable. And a lot of people are forced to join the military or migrate to the United States, which has more opportunity, quote unquote. And mutual aid has been used to get people, you know, their necessities within the United States and Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. So COVID-19 has slammed Puerto Rico just like everywhere else in America. I mean, not America, in the world, but particularly America. And as you would assume, you know, the U.S. government's health, for like their how they provide health to their colony or their health systems aren't that great. And the stats show that 72 out of 78 municipalities are deemed medically underserved, and students are forced to, you know, do remote schooling, but 25% of children do not have access to internet, and 56 do not have access to any kind of computer, along with inconsistent power due to like hurricanes and just like weak infrastructure. Okay, next slide. So another thing in Puerto Rico is the identity, because the history of Puerto Rico is of colonization and slavery. We have the idea that everyone is a mix of African, Taino, and Spanish, but everyone comes in different shades and colorism is a true thing. So we see that in society, microaggressions and violent policing of Black Puerto Ricans happens to be rampant, as seen in America. And yeah, shortly after the assassination of George Floyd, there was organized protests in Puerto Rico for Black Lives Matters, which included Black Puerto Ricans and Black migrants. Next slide. So, as mentioned earlier, a lot of people are forced to migrate because of lack of opportunity. And as you can see in this graph, more people are tending to leave the country because, like, you know, hurricanes, COVID, things like that, unsustainability of jobs, which is a common theme throughout the rest of these slides. Next slide. So The importance of organizing the youth of diaspora is we have a multi-generational youth diaspora, which ranges from grandchildren of those who came from PR, just like me. And there are other students who literally, like I've met from NYU, who are just like dorming in New York and are part of the diaspora doing the same work as I am. You know, everyone getting involved is important with whatever experiences they have and whatever history they got. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much. I wanted to note that I want to give you the opportunity to close out the way that you'd like.
Oh, should I keep going? My bad. Like, yeah, my bad. I didn't get to pinyons because my phone is like being really annoying. So I'm so sorry. But basically, next slide. Oh, I'll just go to the call for action because the other slide is just a quote about youth organizing. But anyways, this August 31st, which happens to be my birthday, we're asking for organizations to release solidarity statements condemning the Fiscal Control Board, the illegal debt, and U.S. imperialism, which has created and profited off of these neoliberal policies, and standing in solidarity with the demand for liberation for Puerto Rico. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry for going over time if I did. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you so much. As the final piece, so just to read the quote that you have for us, I tell any Puerto Rican, no matter where they are in the world, to pay attention to what is happening in Puerto Rico, because this is the only place you can call home, the only place you can form a nation, the only place you can determine your life. By Rafael Cancel Miranda. Thank you for including that. It's an excellent quote. And with that, I would like to transition to you, Monique Sampson, who will be closing us out. Monique is the co-founder of the University of North Florida Students for a Democratic Society and a community activist, and the Jacksonville Community Action Committee. She helped organize 3 of Jacksonville's historic marches that took place after the death of George Floyd, and the refounding conference of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Her favorite thing to do is read novels by Black authors and spend time with her husband, 2 dogs, and a cat. That sounds great. I'll pass it over to you, Monique.
All right, hi y'all. This has been really great to hear everybody and how they're standing in solidarity with action, so on and so forth. So Students for a Democratic Society is a national multi-issue progressive organization of student activists who fight for change on campus. We were refounded in 2006 through the movement against the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our goal is to build a student movement that mobilizes students against crimes against humanity here and abroad. So SDS is in multiple cities around the so-called United States. We have had multiple wins for the student movement, which include increase in Black scholarships, increase in Black enrollment, non-compliance with ICE African American Studies programs, Chicano Studies program. We fought against tuition hikes. We've gotten racist statues removed from campus. We've held vigils for loved ones that have been affected by police crimes and police violence. And we've also done stuff to stand in solidarity with the international community, things like standing in solidarity with Palestine against Israeli occupation, things like demanding the US not invade Venezuela or Iran. We even stood against Trump's travel ban because we understand that these things are wrong and these things are backwards. And it's important for us as students to stand against this level of fascism and this level of imperialism every single time that we can. So whether we're doing sit-ins in our president's office demanding that he divest from certain things that affect the international community, or whether we're holding protests on our college green or making noise, we want to show that standing in solidarity isn't something that you do, for fun. It's a way of life. It's something that you have to do. If you call yourself an activist, you also have to be an internationalist as well. We've also faced things on campus, like for example, when Madeleine Albright came, who was a war criminal and an architect of wars of aggression while she served in the Clinton administration. We decided to let her know that she's not welcome there. This is a woman that said that the death of 500,000 Iraqis was justified. And we know that it wasn't. We know how that turned out. We know the lies that we were told. We know what happened there. And for someone to say that it was justified, these war crimes were justified, we felt the need to stand in solidarity and stand out and speak out and use our voice voices as students to let the community know, because this was a national event, to let everybody know that this war criminal is not welcome here. We do not allow her, we don't want her presence here, period, at all whatsoever. So living here in Jacksonville, it's definitely been interesting, explaining these different things to people, explaining these different things to students. But once they understand the importance of standing in solidarity with the international community and how these things interlink and how none of us are free until all of us are free, they're like, let's do it. Let's fight together. Let's make sure that we get this straight, because when they're coming for this person one day, they'll be coming for us the next day. So it's definitely super duper important that we stand up and fight back. So SDS basically is around multiple cities. We're in Tampa, we're in Jacksonville, Minnesota. So we're in a lot of different places. So if you want to get plugged in, you can send me a message through here on Facebook and I'll help you get plugged in for sure. But just remember, as a student, your role and your presence in these movements is never too small. Stand up, speak out, and make sure that you're standing in solidarity, because it is up to us to come together to fight back, because we're going up against a Goliath of a system, but all of us together are David, and we can take this system down if we continue to fight, continue to mobilize, and continue to organize. So thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm so grateful that all of these groups are coming together to show the importance of solidarity, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you so much.
Yes, Monique, thank you. That was a really powerful closeout. Absolutely fund education, not occupation, and long live international solidarity and our local and so-called national resistance as well. So I know that we've covered just about an hour of this panel, and so we're going to quickly move into questions. And I know that y'all have been sending them in. The first that I would like to ask is specifically to you, Delilah, and also you, Monique, if that's all right, and then of course to others. What role do students in college campuses play in community control of police and the broader abolitionist movement? What are the role of students here?
I think students, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Delilah.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I think students play like an enormous role in kind of like pushing the claims of community control of the police and the broader abolitionist movement, because we see, of course, as we know, the most radical sectors of the working class and some, well, not the working class, but the most radical sector of like our society sometimes coming from these ideas that students make. And so I think when you're a student on campus, you need to be fighting for community control of the police on campus and for the police on your campus to be defunded. And you can do that, in fact. I know FSU and probably UNF as well are fighting for community control of the police on their campuses, as well as the defunding of police on their campuses. They've held, it's also holding protests and showing like solidarity with Black liberation movements, like fighting for higher Black enrollment, fighting for the removal of any like slave statues or racist imagery or iconography on your campus. All of that, I think, is moving towards community control of the police and abolition of the police. And I think they also need to be like, you know, there, influencing people on campus to come out to these movements on the streets. The students better be out there in those movements on the streets, working with the people who are fighting for Black liberation on the streets, working with the people who are fighting for community control of the police on the streets. If you're not at the protest, at the police department, if you're not there when people are hanging banners, signs, removing racist statues all over the city, you're not there at all, I think.
Yes, that's such a beautiful question. I think Delilah covered it wonderfully, but also, in addition to defunding your university police department, definitely do that, because take a look at their budgets. Their budgets are super duper bloated. Here at the University of North Florida, here in Jacksonville, our police officers have military grade weapons. What do they need those for? That's absolutely unacceptable for them to have that. And those are things that could be going towards more Black scholarships. Those are things that can be going toward hiring more Black faculty and staff, not lining the coffers of the university police department, who on their worst day responds to a disturbance about marijuana. Why do they need military grade weapons to do that? That is absolutely unacceptable. So I definitely think students can play an integral role in supporting the community as well as organizing on their campus, because at the end of the day, the end goal, students are going to join the community. I just graduated in May. I started my teaching job on Monday. So I'm working closely with middle school students to try to just help them understand history and contextualize it in a way to where they're learning what really happened. So definitely super duper important for students to get involved, because at the end of the day, the end goal is for you to become a community member. And when you become a community member, you need to use your student activism should serve as training for the community. It should serve as a blueprint for what you're going to do when you get to the community. Student activism is not going to end after your 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It should be something that you take on into the community.
Absolutely. I wanted to invite the other panelists to answer the question, but also add one in. What advice do you have for young people first getting into organizing on sustaining themselves for this long-term struggle? Anything about sprints, marathons, or any sort of other language that you would like to use to talk about the long-term struggle? What are the ways that we sustain ourselves? What are your recommendations?
I would say self-care, but not self-care in a way to where you're procrastinating and not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Self-care in a revolutionary way, in the sense that you're saying, you know what, I'm not feeling okay today. I'm sad today. I mean, for example, when I saw the video of George Floyd, I wept. I was depressed. I despaired, but I only despaired for a day, and I got back up and understood that the way that I'm feeling right now, I have to fight so I don't have to feel this way in the future, so that my students don't ever have to feel this way, so that nobody has to feel the pain of seeing somebody die at the hands of state violence. So it's super duper important to self-care, but understand that don't despair. Don't despair for too long. Get up, organize, fight back, fight against the system that tells you that this is the status quo and this is normal, because that is a bit of self-care in the same way as well as fighting against the system that depresses you so much, that basically controls your life, that basically tells you that you're not enough, that basically tells you that your life is not enough. So that's a form of self-care as well. Just make sure that you don't get burnt out. Make sure that you delegate. Make sure that you meet new people. Hey, I need help with this, or I need help with that. That's part of organizing, is delegating tasks and making sure that you're okay and being honest with yourself. Another good thing is don't bring all of your problems to activist spaces, in the way of understanding that activism isn't your own personal therapy. You're there to fill in for a broader movement. You're there to make sure that you can struggle against an enemy. So make sure that you have a creative outlet for your problems. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. However, unfortunately, in this capitalist country, they don't provide therapy when we need it. We need therapy. We need someone that we can talk to, but unfortunately, that's not available for a lot of people. So maybe just taking a day where you do something, just stare at a wall or watch TV or something, but don't forget to get up and don't forget to fight back.
One of the things I would like to respond to in regards to the role of the students, as much as we have a responsibility, and I agree with Delilah and Monique in regards to our responsibility to get out there in the streets and actually do the work. If you're not doing the work, please don't take credit of the work that's being done. That's out. Yet in all reality, I would encourage that the students also reach down to the younger folks. I'm talking about the elementary age kids, the middle school kids. We as students, we have to make sure that we're not only looking up, we're also looking down. We're kind of like we're that conduit, we're that bridge where we can relate to the younger folks and also have some understanding of what the older folks are saying as well. So I would encourage that part, that we don't forget to start building programs that we can reach those elementary school age youth. As far as the burnout question, yeah, I've been at this work for a while, and I'll tell you, burnout is always around the corner. So I agree with what Monique said, yet I would also include that we have to have some type of balance. At the AARP, we don't talk about entertainment, we talk about edutainment. So for us, I'm gonna be very clear, we go out and we have fun paintballing. We go out and paintball. And one way we're having fun, and in the same way, we're also training. We go out to the mountains and we will sit back and we'll eat, and we'll go and do plant recognition. What's edible plants, what's poisonous plants, what's medicinal plants, et cetera, et cetera. As fun as that is, we're out of the cities, we're out of the stressful environment, we're not hearing the police sirens, and at the same time, we're still training and building. So like Monique said, we're not there to take a rest from the work, yet we're there to find a balance and continuously doing the work.
Yeah, and I think one thing to that point also in terms of sustaining ourselves, like Monique said, student activists are part of a greater movement and a broader movement for whatever respective work they're organizing towards, and that same revolutionary love they have for that cause, also understanding that the people you're around have stakes in what we're fighting for and the dream world that we're building. So to have that love for your fellow organizers and to have that camaraderie and to build that shidla, as we say in Arabic, otherwise like it feels like a workspace and not a love space. And like this is love work, this is passion work. It's not like work, like we're creating and building the world we want to see. So also like having that love for your comrades and building just like that radical love and optimism with one another.
I think also just to respond to the point around students and thinking about, the role, it's also about understanding that if it's possible for students to make revolutionary change on their own, and it's not true. It's only in immersing ourselves in the community that we're able to make genuine change. If we were to separate from ourselves from the people, nothing would be possible. And I think that's, I'm so impassioned by Monique's speech. Because I think that's such a crucial point, is that the whole point of, to see ourselves as students is to see ourselves as students of the people, in order to really ensure that, what we're learning is to serve their best interests. And I think in that question of burnout, and like how to sustain for ourselves in the long haul, we recognize that we're taking the long view in our work, and we need to recognize that in doing that, we need to take the time and patience with ourselves as we take the time and patience to build the world that we're trying to see as well. And we do that by ensuring that we're leaning on one another, that we're leaning on our respective collectives, that we're leaning on the people for them to feel empowered to make change alongside us, so that the weight can feel a little bit lighter on everyone, and that our step feels a little lighter as well.
Yes, thank you. And please as well, feel free to answer the other questions if you haven't gotten a chance. But for a final question here, I wanted to ask one that came up about electoral strategy. So how do we respond to Biden's VP nomination, Kamala Harris, who, although is the first Black woman major party VP nominee, was a former cop, supports private prisons, and is a capitalist and a Zionist, I'll add. What is a response to this from y'all?
I just feel like that's like an extremely complicated question. For one thing, me and the organization I'm a part of, the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, makes sure to distinguish itself and differentiate itself from electoral politics. So we've even had like candidate forums where we allow candidates to like speak about their platform, about whether they support community control of the police, about their feelings on like LGBTQ+ rights, affordable housing, transportation. But we make sure to say, we're not endorsing you. We do not give you our support critically in any sort of way. We might send out like a bulletin or a letter saying this person supports community control of the police, but that's it. We refuse to endorse you. So I think it's maintaining that separation from electoral politics, maintaining an organization that doesn't get sucked into kind of the whirlpool that and the excitement that comes with going out for a candidate, but that often ends up not creating real material standalone work. And I think, Kamala Harris is awful and maybe the corniest human being I've ever thought of in my entire life. Like, she's like, you just look at her record where people used to say that like the place she worked was like a slave ship. She's literally forced trans women into prisons, into men's prisons, and then denied them access to HRT. Like, so like as a person, as an individual, she's awful, awful, awful. So I think like just condemning and pointing out to people that we see these characteristics and traits of the Democratic Party, how they completely and totally refuse to give us even a throwaway progressive candidate. Like, most people would have been satisfied even with Elizabeth Warren, who's a traitor and barely progressive in a lot of different ways, but at least would have been a real concession. Pointing all of that out, but making sure to like continue with your organizing is really important. And like recognizing both people who are like, I'm going to support Biden and Harris because I think it's a quote unquote lesser evil, or people who are like, you know, I'm not going to vote at all because I can't vote for these people on either of their platforms. I'm not going to lie, individually, I don't think it matters that much. I think although we should like, you know, fight and continue to organize, whether Biden and Harris are elected or Trump and Pence are elected, we're going to be doing materially nearly the same work. So I think it's just about like making sure that your organization doesn't get sucked into the whirlpool of we need to organize for this electoral candidate because they're going to save us, and pulling people away from this very weird, distorted savior complex they have about how these US politicians who engage in imperialism and these destructive acts will somehow lift us into the light.
Well, I'd say this: the Republicans and the Democrats have shown their hand, so to speak. We're not confused, you know, and we don't have enough time to highlight all the things both parties have done: corrupt, capitalist, Zionist, et cetera, et cetera. For us, we're going to spend in the APRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we spend our energy in trying to organize and mobilize the community, educate them, utilizing political education to inform them about what it looks like to do our own thing. Now, if people are going to exist within this this process or this un-United States government, and they say, hey, we want to revolutionize it, then I'm saying, hey, okay, you have to pick folks that are going to work for the advancement of your people. If they have ties to capitalism and imperialism, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're not going to put any work towards ending capitalism and imperialism. So regardless of what side they're on, it's, you know, as we always say, it's a two-headed snake. No disrespect to snakes, but I'm giving that as an analogy. So in all reality, y'all, I would say, hey, for us, we're building the global Pan-African movement. Our goal is to unify Africa under scientific socialism so we can have one Africa for the African people. And once we have a strong nation, we can then go to other nations and support them in building their strong nations. Yet putting our energy into these politics here can be time consuming. It can divide the energy and the forces. So that's our humble opinion based on our research and where we see. So I would encourage that we engage in real campaigns of political education so we can really see what these people are doing, who they are, what their goals are. And if they're in alignment with things that we're not in alignment with, we shouldn't be talking about it, period. This whole system, you know, unless we're talking about bringing down the whole system, I think voting for either or can be very dangerous and confusing to the masses.
Yeah, I think on that point, it's important to note that this is talking about people climbing the ladder towards representing essentially US imperialism, right? The representative of US imperialism. And it's important to remember that US imperialism has always been a bipartisan effort. Like we're looking for this election season is looking for representatives that have sent billions, have pumped billions of dollars towards corporations in the midst of a pandemic, pumped billions of dollars towards warfare abroad and fascism abroad. You know, that at the end of the day, it's simply, you know, they're all on the same side. They're all in the ruling class. But that's not to say that, that people shouldn't engage in the electoral struggle. We know that people do find belief in the vote in our electoral struggle. But we know, right, that it's important for us to build the movement at the grassroots, that building political power isn't necessarily going to be through electoral means, but building people power from the ground up.
Great. And any last comments from you all as panelists, please? I think that's the last question we have time for. And so I want to make sure that we hear something quick from each of you if you'd like, and then we'll close out with demands.
If no one else has anything to say, I just didn't talk much about like anti-US imperialism, but I really do, and really like felt with all of the messages y'all had against like this stance against imperialism in the US, and think like the Black liberation movement is totally and completely teethless without its ability to stand with the oppressed nations within the South, within the global South, as well as understand and reckon with our oppression, how our oppression mimics the national oppression of the global South, of these oppressed nations in Africa, of these nations that have been struggling for the unity for so long. So I just want to like really put emphasis on that and point to y'all to learn about the struggles of colonialism, to learn about these struggles against imperialism. Because if we do not understand what they are doing, these people who have been struggling the Philippines for 50, 60 years against imperialism, we have no hopes at beating a force as powerful and as dominant as the United States of America. Our hope lies in truly understanding and putting the program of the global South in our hands. Like, in a way, by saying that, I mean like an understanding and putting like what they want in the hands of the people in the US, of truly having the people in the US understand the kind of mass devastation that the United States brings to everyone. So I just want to say that.
A few things I would say for us as organizers, we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're going to come with a bunch of different backgrounds, viewpoints, opinions, yet we have to be disciplined revolutionaries. We have to be disciplined in the fact to be able to sit down with one another and engage in ideological struggle, non-antagonistic ideological struggle. To engage in ideological struggle, the people have to be informed. We have to study, we have to read, we have to turn those pages. That's a revolutionary act, to pick up a book and turn the pages. As Delilah said, we have to make ourselves aware and informed about what struggles are taking place and how that relates to the history of struggle. What techniques and methods we can utilize to fight against, terrorism, to fight against imperialism, to fight against these forms of terrorism, right? What can we do? So it's going to take time, yet, like I said, we have to be willing to sit down. Last thing I will say is in 1884, there was the Berlin Conference. And as a lot of folks may know about the Berlin Conference, I would encourage us to continue to research about it. The European nations were willing to sit down for 71 days, day and night, to discuss how they were going to tear up, conquer, divide and conquer Africa. 71 days. We've been on this call for almost an hour and a half, and some people are getting restless. This revolutionary work is going to take some time. We got to be willing to sit down for more than 71 days, develop strategies, engage in this ideological struggle, engage in this process in a non-antagonistic way, based on scientific facts, scientific information, and our reality. So I would encourage people to strap on your seatbelt. This ride is going to get shaky. The longer you own it, it's going to get shakier. So strap on your seatbelt and get ready for the ride. Revolutionary salute.
All right, all right. Thank you all so much again for participating as panelists. Thank you all for your questions. I apologize to those that we were not able to get to. I know it's quick. As Mahmoud says, strap in your seatbelts. It's going to be a long ride, and we know that the struggle continues and the work continues out in the streets. Delilah, thank you so much for uplifting, and as many of you did, the importance of popular education and keeping these conversations moving so we can continue to learn from one another and really continue to build intentionally with the knowledge that we can do this. We can learn from one another's struggles, and we do have the fighting chance because we are the fighting chance. And so some of the calls to action, if you wouldn't mind flipping to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. Stop repression and terror against the peoples of the United States, such as Trump's attacks on Black Lives Matter. Call for community control of the police and free all prisoners. Stop arms deals, neoliberal trade policies, and military aid to US-backed violent governments across the world, such as within the Philippines, El Salvador, and some of on the African continent, and support for the US-backed occupation of Palestine and US colonialism of Puerto Rico in the form of the Fiscal Control Board and the illegal debt, and stand always with the people against US imperialism and fight for international solidarity. Yes, today as a convening, we're celebrating International Youth Day. We know that the struggle continues. And just want to shout out to all of y'all who put on the webinar, all of the organizers. And again, thank you all for participating and joining with us. So with that, we're going to close out. Thank you. Thank you again.
Someone want to jump in with a chant? Someone know a good chant?
Long live
International solidarity.
Long live
International solidarity. Woo! Thank you, everyone.
Anyone else got another one?
I know Isan Baksa. That's about it.
Iksang Baksak.
Baksa.
I know we have better rhythm than Zoom is giving us credit.
No, yeah. No favors right now.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night, all.
Night. Bye.
Good night.
All right, justice, everybody.
Solidarity.